We're crossing now to Adelaide, where the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce is addressing the media.
It's good to be in South Australia, in Adelaide. I think it's vitally important that some of the issues, the complexities of the Basin Plan, complexities that raise concerns across the basin from South Australia through Victoria, New South Wales, Townsville, that these are discussed. Obviously, it's water politics is incredibly complicated, but I think if in recent times, I think the one thing that people expect is honesty if there is an issue, transparency in its discussion. I conveyed those concerns to the Minister Hunter in South Australia in a letter. I note that the letter has now been made public. Nonetheless, I think that was an honest portrayal of exactly what I was picking up, whether it's in South Australia, whether it's in Shepparton, whether it's in Mildura, whether it's in Leeton, Deniliquin, and it is a statement of fact of the legislation that it says that the further 450, which has to be delivered by 2024, can't happen if there's socio-economic detriment. Now, I'm all for it, as I also say in the letter. If we can do it without socio-economic detriment, why would anybody have a problem with that?
Effectively, you're saying that the Basin Plan is now dead.
No, I'm not saying that. I see that I said there's obviously been some rather unfortunate and incendiary moments that have happened surrounding this. What I've stated is a clear example that if I go down to Berry and say we're going to take out 36,000 gigs, will this cause socio-economic detriment? They will almost crawl over me saying that will devastate us. If I go to other areas and have the same conversation, they talk quite clearly that it will cause massive problems. I think it's incumbent upon politicians to be honest about a problem. I see it as a problem, I see it as a concern. If someone has a solution, I'm all ears.
Minister,
I'm all ears.
There's a plan in place, and you said in the letter that effectively the plan is dead.
No, I never.
You didn't use those words, but the tenor of the letter is it's unsolvable, and you called for other options. So
I think it's very important to say precisely that. I didn't say it was dead.
Okay.
But what I have said, and I'll say it here, we have to be realists and say, okay, well, if there's solutions out there that you can come up, because the legislation says it can't happen without socio-economic detriment, and that is part of the legislation. That is part of the plan. So it's not saying it's dead when you're actually talking to the reality of the legislation itself.
So are there any backup options? And because what was initially obviously discussed is not going to happen. You said
well, I'm open to all discussions. I mean, and once more, I reinforce what I've said before. The legislation itself, the plan itself, the legislation that surrounds the plan says the 450 can't happen with socio-economic detriment. So it's oxymoronic for someone to run around and say, oh, the plan's dead, when you say, well, no, all he's doing is just stating exactly what's in the legislation. It's how you work within that, and if there's if someone comes forward and says, well, I know the ways we can mitigate this and deal with this, noting full well that we have about $1.77 billion on the table. That shows good faith in it. If people truly believe that we were going to pull away from it, they'd take the money out. The $1.77 billion is there, $200 million for works, but all I'm doing, and I thought this is what people wanted in politics, was an honest and frank discussion about an obvious
Well, apparently
issue.
the South Australian Water Minister gave you a frank and honest assessment of what he thought of you last night at the Minister dinner, and I understand he stormed out and there were some expletives directed towards you and departmental staff. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think I'll leave Minister Hunter to comment on that.
Were you shocked by his language?
Well, of course I can tell you what happened, but I'll leave that for him to explain.
Were you shocked by his language?
I'm a little old boy from the country.
Well,
but,
how would you describe the way that talks have been going with?
Look, I'm always trying. Look, everything we do, what we're trying to do in South Australia, is to drive forward jobs. That's why we have one of the biggest capital investment projects with naval shipbuilding, with submarines, that is happening here. We have shown incredible good faith because we want to make sure that there are more jobs that are driven into this area. The reason we had concerns when there was the blackouts, because that is a complete disincentive to industry moving here. Everything we do is about trying to make sure that we drive jobs, drive investment, and make sure that that we do our part, even though for the ones like I don't live here, but we believe that it's good and proper that you try and work with people to bring about a just outcome. And in a funny way, I suppose that's what I'm saying with the plan as well. You've got to work with others, because others work with you. You've got to work with others and say, how can we do this together? Because if everybody is just purely parochial and says, I only want to talk to you when it's only in my advantage, and I never want to talk to you when there's a form of conciliation required, I think that's a very poor form of politics, and it's very minimalist.
Is that you saying that Ian Hunter's not being cooperative?
Well, I'm disappointed when people scream out of the room, yes.
Do you think he should apologise for the use of the language? Particularly, I think it was also directed towards Anne Ruston.
Well, it's quite to the staff, yeah. I think definitely. I mean, I'm not. What was in the room will stay in the room, but yeah, it's quite obvious that you can't go through a room full of staff screaming at them. No.
So is this 450 gigalitres off the table now?
No, it's just what I've said before. The money is there, but I'm just stating the bleeding obvious. It is part of the legislation, which is part of the plan, which says you can't do it with socioeconomic detriment, which means that you have to convince the people of Berry, you have to convince the people of Deniliquin, you have to convince the people of Shepparton, and you have to convince the people of Mildura right from the very bottom of the river to the top, through South Australia, through Victoria and through New South Wales, because it's their right, because it's also their plan. And if you can't, and then the plan says itself, the legislation says itself, but you can't take the 450. And so I'm stating what I think is, and the reason I'm saying it in South Australia, because I hate people saying, oh, you run away from the issue. I wrote Minister Hunter a letter, I rang him up, I came to South Australia, faced the music, I stated the bleeding obvious. I didn't do this in Mildura or Shepparton or somewhere else, I did it here, because I think you've got to be honest and frank and say, right, this is the problem, let's see if we can work it out.
Will that be to the detriment of the environment?
Well, no, I want to make sure that, and I think we are. I mean, we have made huge leaps forward. We've invested about $13 billion into this. That's an awful lot of money, $13 billion to try and get this right. It's not a case where people say, oh, you're doing nothing. We've done $13 billion worth of investment. We've shown incredible good faith over a long period of time to try and make sure that this thing works out. I think it's, and of course, away from that, for South Australia, we've shown incredible good faith with literally tens and tens of billions. Well, obviously, in excess, I think, of $100 billion by the end of the bill. There was $50 billion in the ships and the submarines. I don't think anybody can say that we've shown bad faith. We've shown incredibly good faith.
And Queensland didn't even bother to turn up?
Yes, well, they were there by teleconference, but I think it's always better if people are there in person. I think that's incredibly important, especially when talking about the futures of people, the small towns, out in the sticks towns like Dirranbandis and near St George's. And these towns, their future, and it's not so much the farmers, because you remember if the farmer sells his water licence, he just tears off and goes to the coast. It's Mrs Smith who lives in 123 Jones Street. She's the one you worry about, because she can't pick up a house and move her life. If you destroy her town, you take away everything she ever worked for, which is associated with the value of her house.
You're saying coming good on this plan is going to do damage. What kind of damage will it do? No,
I'm saying that if you can't, within the plan, bring socioeconomic damage for the last 450, especially for the last 450,000 megalitres. And so people understand how much that is. Sydney Harbour is about 425,000 megalitres, so we're talking about an amount of water, a substantial amount of water, slightly bigger than Sydney Harbour. So, and that's annually. So it's. Why is
it that you cannot come good on this 450? What are the reasons?
No, because within the plan, the way the legislation is actually written and drafted, it says that you can't deliver the 450 gigalitres if there is socio and economic detriment to the communities.
So which communities?
Well, Berry, there's one. Because some of them, I think it's about 36,000 megs has to come out of South Australia.
So just to clarify, you guys are in a intractable stalemate. That's coming out of this meeting. There are no feasible options put on the table, and the states remain divided, and you haven't been able to bring them together.
Well, one of the reasons, Politics is always incredibly complicated. What every minister does is reflect the views of Victorians. It's not divided along political lines. The Victorians have strong views on what they believe is the outcome.
There's still a stalemate along state lines, that's what you're saying. There's no unified way forward.
No, I think that we've gone an awful long way thus far, and I believe that working together, and as the plan is actually written, we can complete, and that's what I intend to do.
Mr Hunter's called for your sacking.
Yes.
Amongst other things.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if he used the terms he used last night, I'll have to meet that person who he wants to sack, because that wasn't my name last night.
What did he call you? What was that name?
I don't know. It was something about a big red fire engine.
They're fairly offensive terms, weren't they?
Well, that's for him. I know. Look, mate.
Doesn't really fit in with Jay Weatherall's order to ministers to be more.
No, I felt like I'd just arrived back at the US presidential election. There you go. Okay, thank you very much.
That's Barnaby Joyce speaking in Adelaide.